Today, I thought I would talk about the difference in child rearing in Japan and the UK. These are just some observations that I have made over the last couple of years, and none of them are right and none of them are wrong. But also watching this might make you feel better about some of the things that you do, which I found it made me feel better when I came over here. I have found 7 main differences and I've looked into the reasoning behind it, so let's get started. The first one is salt and sugar intake. In the UK, there's a lot of talk about the negative effects of salt and sugar on babies' bodies. I remember when I was weaning my daughter, I remember the rule of not going over 1 gram of salt a day. And of course, snacks aimed at children, a selling point was always no sugar and no salt. I think because of my daughter, naturally, we also reduced our own salt intake, so food tastes really salty to us now. Even to this day, we don't put salt on our food in front of our daughter. I think sugar is seen as more of a negative thing, just so that kids don't get into sweets too much. And then of course there's the obesity crisis and things like that. Getting children into sweets and biscuits at a young age can make it more difficult for them to eat healthy foods later on in life. When we moved over here, my daughter hadn't had any sweets. The only sweet I had ever given her was a lollipop for the aeroplane. I still remember how much she dribbled because it was the first time she had a sweet and she was loving it. She was 18 months when we came over here, but when I went to the baby aisles, I noticed that there wasn't really any sugar or salt-free snacks. A really common snack to give babies and children is something called boro, which does contain sugar, and also they give osembe, but it's got a really weak salty taste. Because of the range of the sugar and salt-free snacks that we have in the UK for babies, I was really surprised when I came over here and I couldn't really find any. So then I started to look into the food and the little instant packets of food that they have for babies. And all of them, even if it was just a little amount, they all contained salt. The only snack that I did find was some freeze-dried peaches, apples and bananas, but I don't think you can have them from 6 months old. When we came over to Japan and we were looking for a car, the salesman at the garage gave my daughter a packet of sweets. And we were looking at cars, so my uncle was looking after my daughter. And when we went back to the car, she had a really big smile on her face. I was a little bit surprised because she didn't really know my uncle that well, but then he said he gave her ramune, which is basically pure sugar. And I think she was just so happy. I think in the UK, we would tend to ask the parents before giving anything sweet or sugary. And it just made me realise that it is part of their everyday diet over here. My daughter did have her first cake over here as well, and my husband's aunt said, we give kids anything. And I was like, oh, okay. When my daughter started nursery, they gave us a menu every month of the dishes that they serve for lunch and their snacks. And I was quite surprised to see some of the things that were on there. There were things like ramune for a snack, which is the sugary sweets, kalpis, which contain sugar, it's a sugary drink, and fruit jellies with sugar and things like that. And I was a little bit surprised, but they did also have things like miso soup on there, which I was a bit reluctant to give my daughter because when I checked the salt, it was so high. But over here, it just seems fine to give it to kids. Also in Japan, they do celebrate a lot of things, for example, Tanabata, Hinamatsuri, Setsubun, things like that, and all of them are giving children sweet snacks. There is a celebration in November called Chichigo-san, and it's a celebration of children turning 3, 5 and 7. And for this occasion, they have a sweet called Chitose Ame, which literally translates to 1,000-year candy. It says here the name 1,000-year and the long stretched shape of the candy represent the parents' wish for their child to have a long, healthy life. These sweets come in red and white, and it said these are lucky colours, kohaku, the celebratory colours in Japan symbolising happiness and purity. I do still have her candies here because we didn't give all of them to her, but these are the traditional sweets. Another example is Hinamatsuri, which is a celebration of girls. They're given a snack that's made out of puffed rice, but it's covered in sugar and they're all different colours. Again, each colour has a meaning, so it says here, pink and red is for spring, energies and life. Green is for summer, growth and longevity. Yellow is for changing leaves and white is for snow and purity. So there's a lot of meaning behind these snacks. Also at my daughter's nursery, they do grow potatoes and then they harvest them. And her teacher said to me, oh, she got one of the potatoes and sprinkled salt all over it and then she ate it. And I was like, oh, because we've never given her salt properly like that. I do think that Japanese people have the opinion that treating kids to snacks and things like that on special occasions is fine. I still remember when I was a child and my mum didn't give us sweets and things like that very much, but I used to go to my friend's house and she had sweets everywhere and I used to love it, but she never actually wanted them because they were always available to her. So I don't know if that's the reason why they have this approach. Maybe if you give kids things sometimes, they'll want them less. Also, another thing that I noticed about the Japanese summer, they do bring out salt tablets, mainly for adults, but it just goes to show that in the summer, people sweat a lot to the point where they have to replace their salts. So I did wonder if that was one of the reasons why it was fine to give salt to children, but of course it doesn't explain why they still have it in the winter. Anyway, if anyone can shed some light on this, please leave a comment. I remember telling my friends that I met at baby group in the UK about the nursery giving my daughter sweets, and they said that sweets are completely banned from the nurseries in the UK. And I have to say, another thing that I really like about Japan, I have seen 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds walking around drinking bottles of Coke and no one judges anyone. Although I still can't give my daughter a bottle of Coke, and I just think it's because I've come from the UK, but over here they're really relaxed about these kind of things. I think since coming to Japan, I have become a lot more relaxed about the sugar and salt issue. At the end of the day, Japan hasn't really got the obesity problem. It's more Western societies. And of course, Japanese people live a long time. I'm not too worried about it anymore, but I am still quite careful. The second observation that I made is to do with tidiness and cleaning. As my daughter spent the first 18 months of her life in the UK and the rest of it in Japan, I can really see the difference in the way that the baby groups are run. In the UK, most of the baby groups were run at churches and they would have a huge cupboard of toys and they would just scatter them around the floor on mats. So when we arrived at the baby groups, the toys were already out, and then at the end of the session, mostly the staff at the church would put them away. Sometimes the parents would help, but mostly it was down to the staff at the church. You can imagine my shock when I came to the baby group here. Firstly, there's no eating or drinking in the room. And secondly, every single toy has its place. So what they do is they have shelves and cupboards and things like that, and they put a photo of the toy on the shelf or on the cupboard, so you know exactly where each toy has to go. Children are encouraged to tidy up from a very young age, and also the parents help and the staff, so it's more of a joint thing in Japan. Also in Japan, there is a tradition of having a real deep clean of everyone's houses at the end of the year. I think they do it at companies as well, but when I went to pick my daughter up at the end of the year, when she was 2 years old, the teacher said that she did help wiping down the floors. Of course, in the UK, they have cleaners to do that, but over here, the children from a very young age are expected to help with the cleaning. And this December just gone, the teacher said that they got all the kids to clean out their lockers and give them a good clean. So every single year, they do help out with the cleaning. There is something else that I've noticed here. They don't have people specifically to clean in all the places over here. So for example, when I took my daughter to a doctor's surgery, when the nurse wasn't busy, she started sweeping the waiting room. And every day when I take my daughter to nursery, there's always one of the teachers sweeping the playground. So I do think that cleaning is just part of everyday life here. I did read that it does teach people to be humble, which I do believe is true. I'm not sure if anyone saw, but when the World Cup was on, the Japanese football players left their changing rooms immaculate. And also the people watching the matches, they brought rubbish bags and they cleaned the stadium afterwards, and I felt so proud to be Japanese in those moments. The third one I'd like to talk about is affection. I've been in Japan over 2 years now, and I've only seen 2 dads kiss their kids. In the UK, people are kissing all over the place at baby groups. It's lovely, but it was quite a shock for me to not see that here. I do understand that in Japan, they don't really like public displays of affection. I haven't seen anyone really holding hands or anything like that, so I just think that's the way it is here. But I feel like I'm quite affectionate with my daughter. I just can't resist, and I think, you know, when they do something cute and you just want to kiss them and hug them, over here they just kind of pat them on the head, and that's fine, you know, that's the way they do things here. Of course, I don't have a clue what things are like behind closed doors. Perhaps they just save it for indoors, or maybe they just don't like it, I don't know, but it's just from what I've observed. Number 4 is a little bit of a funny one, and that's bare feet. I've seen so many tiny babies here with their feet out, and I used to just think, oh God, it must be so cold. Of course, in the UK, we don't really do that. I think yesterday it was about 3 or 4 degrees, and I saw an almost newborn baby in a baby grow, but with their feet bare at Uniqlo, which is a Japanese clothes shop that they have in the UK. All the baby grows have got their feet missing. I did have a look into this because for me it was very strange. But there is an explanation, and it says here, Kangeiko cold training. The idea is that exposing children to the cold helps strengthen their immune system and makes them more resilient. Keeping the feet bare is seen as a way to help the body to learn to regulate its own temperature rather than relying on external bundling. Babies don't sweat like adults. Covering their feet can trap too much heat. Japanese parents are taught that a baby's hands and feet should be cool to touch. As long as the chest and tummy are warm, the baby is considered perfectly fine. It does also say here about brain stimulation. It says bare feet allow babies to receive sensory input from the ground, which is believed to stimulate brain development. It also says here, in traditional Eastern medicine, the feet are often called the second heart. By keeping them bare and active, it is believed that blood circulation is actually improved through movement and contact with the floor rather than being restricted by tight elastic socks. So there we go. Number 5 is co-sleeping. When I had my daughter in the UK, the midwives and the health visitors were completely against co-sleeping. There were times when I did co-sleep, although I did try to avoid it as much as I could. There were some nights where my daughter just wouldn't settle, and we just ended up doing it because I was exhausted and I'm sure she was probably tired, and it was just all too much. But it's almost like a guilty secret. It's almost like you're made to feel ashamed to admit that you do it. And of course I completely understand the reasoning behind it. You know, you have a baby that could get squashed or elbowed, or it could fall out of bed, so I do completely get it. But over here, it's really normal for children to co-sleep with their parents or their mothers till around the age of 5. I think the situation is a little bit different because a lot of people do sleep on the floor, so there's little risk of a baby falling out of bed and hurting itself. But I do feel like it's really nice that you can freely say, I co-sleep with my baby or my child. I did meet a man in the park and his son was 7, and he said, yeah, we still co-sleep, but you know, he moves around a lot. And I just thought it's just so refreshing that you can just be open about it and just say what you're doing. And number 6 is bathing. In Japan, bathing isn't just about being clean, but it's also about bonding. It is quite common for children to bathe with their parents. This isn't so common in the West and the UK, so it may seem a little bit strange for us. If anyone has watched My Neighbor Totoro, Tonari no Totoro, which is an anime film, there is a scene in the film where it says Satsuki, Mei and their father all get into a large wooden soaking tub together. They are laughing and splashing to scare away the soot spirits. It says here, American distributors feared that Western audiences would misinterpret family bathing as something inappropriate or sexual, which is a complete projection of Western taboos onto a very innocent Japanese custom. It says here there were internal discussions about cutting it, but Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli have a famous no cuts policy, so the scene stayed. Ironically, most American parents didn't find it offensive at all. They just saw it as a happy family, which is really, really nice. It really does highlight the difference in culture between the West and Japan. And last but not least, this is actually a really, really nice one, is the family support. I have noticed just when I'm out and about that there's a lot of new mothers with their own mothers. Of course, that doesn't mean in the UK that families aren't supportive when someone has a baby, but it's just something that I've noticed more in Japan compared to the UK. So those are my observations so far. Probably I'll pick up more along the way, but it just goes to show, you know, people do things differently and it's not necessarily right or wrong, and everyone's got their reasoning behind it. I do have to say, coming out here, it did make me feel more relaxed and better about certain things I was doing. I was always really uptight and worried about getting things wrong, but I think just seeing the way different people do things has made me a lot more relaxed. If anyone has picked up anything else or can explain the reasoning behind some of the things that I've spoken about, please drop a comment. That's it for now. Sayonara.